You think inequality is about greed. You picture a few rich people sipping wine while everyone else counts coins, and you feel safe believing it's just a math problem that can be fixed with better policy. But inequality is not just money. It is psychology. It is power over time, power over choices, power over what people believe is possible. And if you think basic income will magically dissolve that power, you are about to volunteer yourself for a softer kind of captivity. Because the question underneath UBI is never whether people can survive. The question is who gets to decide the rules of survival and who gets to keep the future for themselves. Welcome to the hidden self, where we say the truth out loud, the truth people edit out of their own minds. Today we are talking about universal basic income, the dream of a society where no one starves, where the floor is guaranteed, where human dignity stops being a privilege. And then we are going to look at the darkest version of that same idea, not as sci-fi, as a slow administrative redesign of reality, a redesign that can leave you fed and still powerless. UBI is often sold like a safety net, but safety nets can also be leashes. The same mechanism that prevents starvation can normalize dependence, and dependence is the oldest political technology on Earth. It turns citizens into managed assets. So let's start where most people start, with the comforting logic. A human stomach is a human stomach, right? Everybody has to eat. Everybody has to sleep. Everybody needs feet to walk and a roof to stay under. So it seems reasonable to imagine that the richest group can't be consuming that much more than everyone else. They only have one body, one life, one set of needs. That story collapses when you look at who actually controls spending at scale. In the United States, just 10% of the richest people capture around half of total national spending. 10 people can spend as much as the other 90 combined. And that spending is not random. It is structured, enabled, and protected by institutions that funnel money upward. So even before you talk about UBI, you need to understand something ruthless. Modern economies don't run on the labor of the many in the way people pretend. They run on the consumption and financial leverage of the few. The majority works. Fine. But the minority's spending sets the temperature. Their taxes, their investment decisions, their market power, their ability to influence policy, that is the bloodstream of the whole system. Now bring in AI and robots. If AI and automation replace a large chunk of jobs, the political question becomes unavoidable. What happens to millions of people who no longer sell labor to survive? UBI becomes the answer some people love because it sounds like compassion and practicality at the same time. Universal basic income is a policy where the state, or a shared financial mechanism, pays a fixed amount to every citizen every month, whether they work or not, whether they are rich or poor. The stated goal is clean. Keep people from falling into hunger and homelessness when automation steals livelihoods. Give everyone a baseline. Let human beings keep breathing. It also creates something else, something less openly discussed. It gives society a way to absorb technological displacement without collapsing. It makes the transition smoother for power holders and less destabilizing for them. Experiments have already happened. Finland tried a version starting in the late 2010s, giving money to unemployed people. Different pilots ran in other countries. Some studies show mixed results, some show modest improvements, some show controversies about work incentives. But the real reason UBI is exciting is not because it is proven perfect, it is because it solves a political anxiety. It turns unemployment into a managed condition rather than a revolution waiting to ignite. And that leads to the first uncomfortable fork in the road. In a shallow version of the future, UBI is a bridge. Technology reduces the need for labor. People keep buying goods and services. The economy stays stable because money continues to circulate. Productivity rises because machines do more work. Consumers keep consuming. Nobody collapses. Maybe even people have time to learn, create, care for family, or build new projects. This story can feel like justice. Like finally, society adapts to reality instead of punishing human beings for being replaced by machines. But here is the psychological problem. The story assumes that if people receive money, they receive power. Money is not the same thing as agency. A guaranteed income does not automatically guarantee control over your life. It does not guarantee bargaining power. It does not guarantee influence over institutions. It does not guarantee that you can convert your time into real leverage. And when power is concentrated elsewhere, money can become a substitute for freedom. So let's go deeper. Let's look at the moment where the safety net stops being a net and becomes a floor, and the floor becomes a boundary. Imagine a society where most people do not build wealth, they do not accumulate assets, they do not own businesses that outlive them, they do not invest in long-term projects, they live month to month on a fixed monthly transfer that covers basics. Each month, money appears. Like a modern ration card, like electricity in your wall, it turns on automatically, and you stop thinking about where it comes from. You can buy food, you can pay for simple housing, you can access entertainment. You are not starving. But the dream of ownership fades, the dream of owning land, owning a home, owning shares, owning something that grows, disappears as a practical possibility. The future becomes a subscription. People get used to the rhythm. They stop planning for escalation because escalation is not rewarded. When your life is stabilized but constrained, you become psychologically trained to accept limits. This is where UBI's trap can become invisible. The trap is not that you can't survive. The trap is that you stop trying to become dangerous. You stop becoming a threat to the system because you don't need to fight for survival anymore. And when people stop fighting, power holders stop fearing them. You might say, so what if they can't own? At least nobody dies. And that is the exact sentence that keeps people docile. The hidden self loves that logic because it is emotionally clean. No suffering, no conflict, no chaos, just peace. But peace can be the calm surface of a locked room. In this darker model, society splits into layers so sharply you can feel it in your bones, even if you never see a sign that says members only. At the top are super rich people. They don't just own money, they own the controlling infrastructure, technology, data, the platforms, the legal and political channels. They can shape what is considered normal, what is considered valuable, what is considered acceptable. UBI for them is not charity, it is stabilization. A tool to keep the masses calm while resources and control continue to concentrate. In the middle are the wealthy who are not super elite. Entrepreneurs, investors with a few million, maybe a few dozen million. People who believed they were safe because they were rich enough. But even this group can be squeezed. Compared to those at the absolute top, they are just swimming fish. They can be productive, but they are not sovereign. And at the bottom is the majority that depends completely on the transfer. They receive enough to exist. They have a life, but they have limited leverage. They have fewer choices. They have less bargaining power. They have less time to experiment, fail, and try again, because their margin for error is gone. Their survival is guaranteed. Their capacity to change their status is not. So yes, on paper it looks fair. Nobody starves. Nobody is officially abandoned. But fairness without power is not liberation. It is containment. UBI can draw a line around aspiration. It can feed the majority and simultaneously teach them to stop reaching beyond the line. That is how you get social separation without explicitly creating apartheid. It looks like equality because basic needs are met, but it functions like stratification because the capacity to rise is removed. So the paradox becomes real. The closer you get to minimum fairness, the easier it becomes to enforce maximum inequality. And then the key question arrives. The question nobody wants to ask because it sounds cold, but it is the only honest question left. If you can live without working, what do you live for? In the optimistic version, you live for creativity, learning, family, art, research, and exploration. People reclaim time that was stolen by necessity. Some scholars even argue that if enough people have time, new families form, new birth rates rise, and new social energy grows. In this vision, freedom expands. But the dark version is more likely than people think, because human psychology does not automatically become noble just because people have time. If you take away the economic pressure that forces structure, a large portion of people will not suddenly become philosophers. Many will do what is easiest to escape themselves. They will consume, they will numb, They will chase stimulation. They will survive inside an endless feed of entertainment, games, video, virtual reality, curated shopping experiences, and algorithmic experiences designed to keep them engaged. And when you remove work as an identity anchor, you do not remove emptiness. You redesign emptiness and hand it to platforms. A society can end up with two different types of idle, and the distinction matters. There are people who convert free time into meaning. They create, they study, they build communities, they develop skills and become influential in real ways. And then there are people who become residents of the entertainment economy. They live inside systems that monetize attention, and attention becomes their only form of agency. In the first group, time becomes capital. In the second group, time becomes product. This difference becomes a new class divide, not just a wealth divide, a purpose divide. And purpose is where power hides, because purpose decides whether you move toward growth or drift toward dependency. Now we reach the next escalating depth, the part you really don't want to hear. UBI does not exist in isolation. It requires funding, it requires political enforcement, it requires administrative systems to deliver payments, validate identity, and manage fraud. So it depends on state capacity, and state capacity, in a technological age, depends on control systems. If the transfer is conditional in practice, even if it's called unconditional, governments will still develop ways to influence behavior, not always through explicit threats, often through subtle constraints. What counts as eligibility, what counts as acceptable behavior, what gets your access delayed, what gets your payment reduced, what gets you flagged. And if you imagine that in a future of AI and robots, oversight becomes cheap. Oversight becomes everywhere. AI can analyze patterns, drones can watch streets, automated systems can intercept protests, automated surveillance can map social networks. Social media can be managed by automated moderation and algorithmic suppression. Even if someone tries to rise, the system can detect the early signals and dampen them before they become a movement. People romanticize revolution like it is a human spark, but in a world of predictive analytics, rebellion can be treated like noise. Now look outside the theory. In war, cheap drones changed battlefield dynamics. Even without fancy weapons, observation and automation altered outcomes. That should scare you in civilian life too. When surveillance becomes cheap and scalable, political resistance becomes expensive and risky. So if you remove labor-based identity and you stabilize survival through transfers and you equip the state with automated monitoring, you can produce a society that is calm, not because people are satisfied, because people are managed. And in that managed calm, a small group does something very important. They keep the economy running while preventing the masses from becoming sovereign. They control technology, because technology decides who produces value and who receives it. They control assets, because assets decide who can weather shocks. They control politics, because politics decides which rules become law. And then they get to decide what, like, freedom means. This is the hidden self moment where you realize something uncomfortable. You might be offered a life without hunger, but you might be denied a life with real voice. Because the old model was simpler. In the old model, citizens were pressured to work. Work was the gate to survival and status. People could argue, vote, organize, protest for better jobs and wages. Even if the system was unfair, people had pressure points. In the UBI model, citizens become recipients. They receive. They depend. They can still vote, but their bargaining power is diluted. Their survival is tied to the continued functioning of the transfer system. So resistance becomes harder to justify emotionally and practically. Why risk losing your payment when your rent depends on it? Why protest when your basic needs are connected to state goodwill? That is how dependency becomes obedience. It is not dramatic. It is not cinematic. It is psychological. You get trained to behave, not through fear alone, through incentive, and then you get trained to internalize the system as normal. And here's where the story gets even sharper, because it forces you to confront investment logic and elite behavior. When people talk about UBI, they often talk about helping the people. But the economy doesn't care about your intentions. It cares about where money accumulates and who controls spending. If the majority stops producing labor value in the same way, what drives the economy? Spending by the wealthiest does. So the future economy becomes consumption-driven by a small elite class. say it plainly. The future economic rhythm is set by a minority. When 10% of people control half of spending, businesses will target them. Real estate, luxury services, personalized healthcare, high-end education, bespoke travel, exclusive experiences, premium technology ecosystems, and infrastructure that enhances elite comfort. Even if the majority receives UBI, many sectors will still be structured around serving the top. So UBI might increase baseline purchasing power for the masses, but it doesn't automatically democratize markets. It can actually widen the gap because elites still control the highest value opportunities. Elite spending becomes the engine, the masses become the audience. Now, some investors will see this and adapt quickly, and this is the lesson that turns out to be uncomfortable for ordinary people. If you want to understand the future, don't stare at average wages. Stare at elite consumption patterns, elite investment flows, and elite asset behavior, because the elite do not need UBI to survive. UBI is designed for the displaced masses. For the elite, UBI can be a political tool and a market stability mechanism, and if the economy depends on their spending, then their power becomes even more central. So UBI can become a system where the elite don't just own wealth, they shape policy and technology so that wealth continues to concentrate. And once you combine policy control with technology control, you get a strategic alliance. In a worst-case scenario, the state and the super-rich stop being rivals and become partners. The state needs money. The super-rich need stability and influence. The state can collect taxes and channel funds. The super-rich can control the productivity engine and the profit engine through technology, platforms, and intellectual property. So to maintain UBI at scale, the state leans on the productivity and profitability produced by the elite-controlled systems. And to protect their interests, the elite lean on the state's enforcement power. That creates a political structure where the masses are offered inclusion through subsistence while the governance and infrastructure remain locked at the top. If you want to understand how quickly this can become real, watch what happens during crises. The same people who claim they oppose UBI during calm times become enthusiastic during instability. During economic shocks, subsidies expand, eligibility changes, payments increase, and oversight becomes more invasive. In crisis, the system grows, and once it grows, it doesn't shrink back to the old size. It becomes infrastructure. It becomes normal. Now connect this to how people live psychologically. If your life becomes a monthly transfer plus a curated experience, your identity starts to reorganize around receiving. You don't plan based on building. You plan based on maintaining access. You become less focused on long-term mastery and more focused on short-term comfort. So the dream of ownership turns into a service model. Instead of buying a home, people rent forever. Instead of buying a car, people subscribe. Instead of saving for the future, people spend because future security is already promised at a basic level. And when the future is already promised at minimum, you stop pushing beyond minimum. This doesn't just change your bank account, it changes your brain's reward system. It trains your patience to shrink. It trains your tolerance for limitation to grow. A person who keeps receiving enough to survive but not enough to rise will eventually feel that trying harder is pointless. Not because they are weak, because the system quietly tells them effort won't buy them escape. So what happens to culture? Culture changes when the source of dignity changes. In the old world, work was used as proof of worth. People were told that their labor was their value. Their job title became a social anchor. Their productivity became a measure of legitimacy. In a post-work or reduced-work world, that anchor breaks. If the anchor breaks and you don't replace it with something meaningful, many people will chase experiences designed to simulate purpose, and platforms are ready for that. They will offer infinite content that feels like meaning. They will offer communities that feel like belonging. They will offer identities that feel chosen, but are actually algorithmically reinforced. Meanwhile, the elite build different kinds of meaning. They build influence. They build power. They build the future through technology and policy. So the result is a new split in human identity.